Today we're going to talk about a really serious subject on the podcast. My guest with me today is Laurie Markvart, who's written a lot in her new memoir about mental health issues and generalized anxiety disorder. So coming up on this episode, A Mission My Life, you're going to want to stick around for this. Welcome back to the channel. I am codependency recovery coach Dana Cooper, and today I'm so excited to have with me Laurie Markvart, longtime friend. She just wrote this book, Somewhere in the Music, I'll Find Me, a memoir. Laurie has been in the Austin music scene a long time, which is where I hail from, and now she's come out here all the way from Los Angeles to be with us. You may have seen on our channel where we've promoted the Capsize interview that I got to do with her and her playing, and that was so much fun. We just got done with that today. If you're watching the video, yeah, so good. And we're still here at Austin Public, and I thought that I would get Laurie to sit down and talk with us a little bit, because in this book, I mean, from the title, like Somewhere in the Music, I'll Find Me, you think, oh, maybe it's just, a rock and roll memoir, and there is that. We do talk about, you talk about the Austin music scene, and yeah. It's so strange, and I've said a couple times, it's so strange, like reading part of your history that I was there for.
Yeah, it's kind of your history too.
It's kind of mine too, and I'm like, this is uncomfortable. I was there. But what I really want to concentrate today, and due to the nature of the channel and everything, is there's a big component of this book that centers on mental health issues. Not just, I think that you can normalize it enough. I don't think that it has to be just mental health issues of a musician.
Right.
And there's a lot, concerning your mom and you. So let's talk about that aspect. I mean, you said that, so did you get an official diagnosis of, okay. So talk about that a little bit, the official diagnosis of the generalized anxiety disorder.
Well, it came about, by the way, thank you for having me do this, because we are going to get more into the core of mental illness and the stigma, and a lot in the book. And I'll keep grabbing the book. Here's the hardcover version. Yes, is the stigma about it. So my mom had bipolar. She's no longer with us, but my mom had bipolar and a severe anxiety disorder. I was diagnosed with a generalized anxiety disorder, and there are various disorders that go along with mental illness. So mental illness in itself, just the same, just the sweep of it sometimes isn't enough, because the spectrum can be here and all the way over to here. So my mom had a very severe anxiety disorder, but bipolar is pretty hardcore for a mental illness, for someone to not only survive through life with it, but thrive. And I know that's kind of a, trendy word too, like thriving through things. But, oh my God, mental illness is really incapacitating. And my mom struggled through life with it. But what was harder was actually the stigma that went with it from our own family. Didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to acknowledge it. So when I was diagnosed with general anxiety disorder, it was postpartumly. So if anybody doesn't know what that means, is after you have a baby, postpartum, I had severe anxiety. And that's when the doctor diagnosed me, but also said, are you sure you hadn't been dealing with anxiety previous to this? Because my child was, and I was like, maybe I probably did, but I did not want to admit to it, acknowledge it, because my family wouldn't. And at the time, society, we're talking...
Yeah, let's give some dates here, because we're talking like, 80s, 90s, not now.
Not now.
The landscape has changed vast. So you're talking about like that time frame, or even earlier?
Well, yeah, for my mom, even earlier. I mean, she was born in 1938. So when she was going through her most severe mental struggles, this would have been the 70s, 60s and 70s.
Wow.
Nobody talked about it then. It was just so taboo, because God forbid, if someone's struggling up here, that was not okay to talk about. It's just dumbfounding to me. But if somebody had a broken leg or a bad back or heart disease, sorry about hitting the microphone, that could be talked about, and it was okay. But society, and I'm also going to probably say culturally, everything from movies to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I mean,
that's when you said movies, that was the first thing that came to my mind. Yeah,
which because it's a hard movie. It is, but it did not really give a positiveness to what people go through with mental illness. But people get scared. I've gotten scared if I feel like I can't control my mind, or if I'm kind of sliding into some depression or anxiety. And I got us off track, because I think the original thing you were asking about is when I was diagnosed. And
this is good. This is all good backstory.
Yeah, I mean, I did have anxiety in my youth. My mom, not only having a severe anxiety disorder, she was bipolar. So I was dealing with bipolar as someone who has a swing through their I almost said temperament. That's not really it. It impacts their.
It's like a puppy.
Yeah.
No, but everybody does have a temperament.
A temperament,
it's true.
But she would swing between being manic, which is super high and super excited and super in charge, to being extremely low.
That's the bipolar.
And she would do this every couple of weeks. So as a child, I never quite knew what I was going to get. And neither did my father, any of us in the household. It could be very disheartening and scary. And as a young child, yes, I had anxiety. I didn't know what it was, because I didn't know what to expect. So I was always on edge. I was always like, what do I do now? How do I react? How do I protect? And I also had such a care and love for my mother. I wanted to protect her, even though I didn't know what I was protecting her against. But I knew I was protecting her from her own family, because her mother was just like, no one will talk about this. And that, as a child, I was like, that's not right. I knew something in deep within me, intuitively. I'm like, that's not right. So I wanted to protect her. So I developed anxiety quite young. Just was not talked about. And my grandmother her mother had anxiety. Back in the day, then they used to call it hysteria.
This is true. I remember that.
Yeah. Or maybe that goes into the word, like, don't be so hysterical. Yeah, and it's like, and it was really hard for my mom, because her mother would not acknowledge it, and yet her mother was dealing with the same thing. And then I eventually dealt with it too. But how I would cure it for myself in my 20s is I would dive into music and play music to escape. And in my teen years too, I'd escape it. My anxiety, or I never got severely depressed, or even I was depressed enough at times in my 20s. I was medicated, but that scared me, because there was still, and this would have been the 90s, there was definitely a time of, you don't want to talk about depression.
No.
Because you don't want people to think bad of you, or that you're not a good time, or that you're not fun.
Well, people think that, I think there was a stigma that you were defective in some way, and that you couldn't be a good whatever employee, wife, mother, girlfriend, friend. I mean, I really think that that's what it was. It was like they would see you as something less than who you were.
Yeah. And it wasn't fair, because that part of the brain is just not working. And there's various parts of the brain that may not be working, but that doesn't mean the person is less than.
Right.
And just like if anyone has any type of, really any disease or illness or handicap, they are not less than. And that's one thing in the book I really found. I wanted to make it known that my mom was more than her illness. And I did it through my dad's voice, because I was a wounded child with a mother who was so sick, but I felt like my dad chose this. He chose to marry somebody.
He did. Your father's revelations towards the end of the book were amazing. I just remember being like, wow, like he chose it.
He chose it, and he chose to love her no matter what, even though it was hard. And they did divorce, and they remained wonderful friends until the day he died.
Yeah.
And that taught me a lot about relationships, but also how to accept someone going through a disease or an illness. And I think one of the things he said, well, not think, I wrote it, but I do remember him saying it was, she is more than her illness, and you have to forgive her. But people with mental illness can wear on those who don't have mental illness. They don't mean to. They're not choosing it. And that's where I think the issue comes, because society's like, you're choosing that. You're choosing to be mentally ill. No, okay, if somebody does go break their leg, if they were skateboarding, say, and they broke a leg, did they choose that? Well, they chose to go skateboarding, but they didn't choose to break their leg. Yeah. No. So we all come into this life, and we don't come in choosing to have a mental illness or a disease or anything that is going to impact us to how society views us.
You were talking about that you've probably had this all your life, and you were also talking about this happens too. So my specialty is narcissism. Okay, and what happens to children, who are children of narcissists, is almost the same thing that happens when you're the child of someone who has a severe mental illness like bipolar or something like that. You become the parent.
Yes, absolutely.
You become absolutely parentified. So you were talking about how you need to take care of her, and those highs and lows, and that's something that happens with a narcissist too. It's like up and down. I mean, you get addicted to that almost.
Yes,
like it causes. I think I read something about it causing swelling and contraction of the amygdala. So it's not surprising that, to me anyways, that you probably did carry this anxiety, and perhaps it got worse throughout your life. Being a musician, as we are, so do you think that before we realize that, do you think that we deal with it in other ways? Because being young musicians, I know I would drink a lot. Being the time that we were musicians, there was a lot of drugs and alcohol around. Do you think that self-medicating in those ways might have kept you from realizing that there were any issues?
When I hit a real dark space at around 27, which seems to be that age.
That's that age, isn't it? Yeah.
When a lot of not normal, but I should say, those at the age of 25 to 28 go through that stage of, who am I? What am I doing? I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not quite an adult. Should I settle down and get married? You haven't really gotten into your career yet to be a man. You're just in a flux of like, what am I going to be and who am I going to be? A band I was in at the time brought me, Wicked Gypsy was the name of the band. It was this heavy metal band in Austin. And we were together for 4 years. And in that band, I always got my joy and got my happy. When I was on stage, I was like, no drug can compare to the stage high. So
True.
Right? Sure. And so when I wasn't on stage, though, I was fine because I was in this band and everything was good. But then when the band broke up, I was heartbroken, and I didn't know where to put the energy anymore. I didn't know where to get my high either. That's when I dabbled in some drugs like ecstasy. In the book, I talk about ecstasy. I talk about acid. That did me no good. That did no fucking good. that just messed me up more. I realized, though, I was substituting those drugs to take the place of my lack of joy. I wasn't getting any more from performing. But those drugs also sent me into deeper depression, sent me into more anxiety. Thank God, probably because of my mother's mental illness, I had enough awareness to go, something's off, something's not right. Unfortunately, you and I know of people who maybe discovered that, but they didn't know how to overcome it, or they didn't have the assistance. Again, the stigma about mental illness in the 80s and 90s was so strong. Absolutely. And we've lost friends to that.
So many.
And there's a part of my book I talk about when I was coming out of that dark space, and my dad helped. My dad was like, get off the drugs, stop using drugs. I wasn't on drugs that long. I think I did just a 2-month binge of ecstasy and acid. That was all I needed to shake me up and go, whoa, this isn't working. My dad was like, just get off the drugs and you'll be okay. But I started to see a therapist, and a doctor prescribed me Prozac too, which I'm not a doctor, so I will not say pros or cons against any kind of drugs, this or that. They work for people. Some people, not so much. But for me at the time, I didn't want the Prozac, but I took it It probably did help, but it also numbed the shit out of me creatively. So I was asking this therapist in the book, like, how did I not kill myself? How do some people not? Why do some people do it? And you have to read the book to get into more details on what she said to me, but I thought was really impactful on how some people are so sick, they don't even realize how sick they are. And that's what pisses me off so much about the stigma and people saying, you chose this. No, some people are so sick they don't even know. And they just need help and compassion and acceptance and not just a fucking hashtag mental health awareness month or I'm loving this new generation.
Yes, I'm loving that it's becoming normalized.
It's normalized, but almost too normalized.
Exactly.
That it's fatigued and people are just like, oh, well, I hashtagged it, or oh yeah, my mom has anxiety, or my mom or my dad is depressed, or yeah, my brother's depressed. But are people willing to talk about schizophrenia, bipolar, psychoactive? I mean, there's a lot
that I don't think. I mean, I think anxiety is becoming a lot more accepted. You know, just anxiety or depression, but there's so much more.
And people, and that's what I was saying about this generation. I appreciate that they know how to say those are touch points for me, or that's they know how to set boundaries, and they can say that causes me anxiety, or I have anxiety triggers. Triggers is a big word, trendy word, but yet you can say that to your friends. And they can say it to their friends, but most companies to this day, if you go into your employer and say, the workspace is triggering my anxiety, they'll be like, shut the fuck up and get back to work. I mean, that still sits there, right? I hope your podcast is okay with
cussing. We'll just slap a 18 and over on it.
Yeah, sorry. And most companies wouldn't say that, but it's kind of...
No, I mean, that's actually, though, I will say that is becoming better too. That corporate America is starting to realize that, and they're putting more health initiatives into their benefit packages. And I think we've come a long way. I think we have a long way to go, but I think that we've come a long way in recognizing. What I'm worried about is we're recognizing so much that also we're just okay with recognizing. I think we also need to normalize healing from it.
Yes. To your point, it's like there's an acceptance. There's an awareness, but not necessarily an acceptance. Because with acceptance, people will be more caring and loving and patient to those who are going through things. And this just hit me. I never thought of this really before, but you know how there's been so many, because we have phones all the time, so we're always videoing stuff and everything goes online like this. But people love to catch people losing their shit on an airplane, or people losing their shit in a grocery store, and people find it humorous. And some people's actions are pretty shitty, but maybe those people are suffering. Maybe they have a mental condition. Maybe they have a mental illness. Maybe they just got pushed over the edge. I'm not condoning. I'm just saying I wish society would stop making it a show and being like, ha ha ha, that's so funny. Look at that lady threw a drink at that guy at McDonald's, or people are losing their shit on airplanes. It's just like those people are suffering in some way. We just need more compassion.
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, especially with the advent of like TikTok and Instagram lives, it's like way too easy to capture that, and there probably needs to be more compassion for it's like really be like, ooh, okay, you know, something heavy's going on here, instead of let's laugh at this.
Yeah, or let's just immediately slam that person is messed up.
Right.
There is some behavior out there that is messed. Like people just shouldn't act like that, right? But yet we need to stop making it entertainment. It's not entertainment.
So we've talked a lot about like how your anxiety began and some of the things that you went to a therapist, you did get medication. What do you do now? There's the great thing. Let me back this up and say the great thing is that I have found a lot of help for anxiety. There's a lot of people on YouTube now. There's a lot of people, you know, putting things out there. What have you found works for you now that could, you know, help anybody like listening to this or watching this? What have you found helps now with your anxiety?
When there are things I wish I would have known back then. Right? Because the goodness is, like you're saying, it is topical now, so there are more resources. And there's resources in the back of my book, actually, that are more based for if somebody's suicidal. So I got the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, Lifeline, sorry. There's a National Alliance of Mental Illness in here. And then there's the Sims Foundation,
Love
which
Sims.
is based here in Austin.
Yes.
But I have found 5 key things that I do when I'm feeling anxiety.
Yeah, let's do it.
And I did a post about this, so I'm all over the internet, but
she's everywhere.
We're gonna do the 5 things, and this is
if you Google her, she's everywhere.
If you Google me,
we talked about this.
We talked about it in the other show. I'm so lazy. I'm like, just Google me, but it's kind of easy.
It's kind of easy because your last name is pretty rare.
My last name is not that easy. Yeah.
Like if they said Dana Cooper.
Dana Cooper.
Yeah, that would be a lot. So for you to say Google me totally works. So give me the 5 things.
The name again. The 5 things I do to stop an anxiety attack is the first one is, for me, you find where your anxiety lives in the moment. It could be here, it could be your throat chakra, it could be your chest. It's just where it is. Mine is here usually, but I kind of place both because it feels comfortable to put my hand there. So I touch myself and go, I don't like that. That sounded weird. I touch myself when I get around. Yeah. So I do this just to be like, you're okay. You're okay. Like ground myself. And then the second is I do 10 deep breaths that are just deep in, hold a bit, and then let it out through the mouth. So in through the nose and then out through the mouth. And if you're in a public space where that feels, weird to you, go to a restroom, go somewhere private and just do it. But also that goes to the stigma. If you're in the middle of somewhere and you need to ground, do it. Who cares who's looking at you, right? So it's the touch, the breathing. The third one is the grounding. That's really important. Like touching wherever you are. Like touch and go, I'm touching Dana. Like I'm touching you. I'm touching the seat.
Touching the table.
And grounding and going, the seat is blue. This is tan. It's sunny outside. As soon as you deflect to something else, you come out of your headspace of intensity. Yeah. So I ground to what's around me. Another really great way is take your shoes off and go stand in the grass or go stand even on the cement. Go outside and just be like, whew, here we are. So that was number 3. Number 4 is the talk of saying, you're okay. Everything is okay. This is just an anxiety attack. There's panic attack. You're okay. Because when I talk to myself, then I kind of am like, okay, oh, you're here. Like everything is okay. Like
it's good.
Yeah. And this takes time though. So it's like, you can't just be like, you're fine. And it moves. Some panic attacks and anxiety attacks are really unsettling when you don't think you're going to get past it.
Yeah. I mean, some people dissociate, depersonalization, derealization, like it's a thing. And I've had panic attacks that badly before. It would be very hard to ground.
When you're freaking the heck out and your body is so like buzzed. I don't know if you've had.
No, I do. When you just said that, I was like, oh yes.
The buzzing. Yeah. And then how else does it show for you? Like,
it's pretty much that. I get dizzy. Have never like passed out or anything like that. But the panic attacks, usually like I shake too. Yeah, if it gets too far.
Which I'm glad you said that, because I think it's almost like pain. Like when you have something painful, like a surgery, they always say take the pain meds before the pain, like you work ahead of it.
Yes.
So with anxiety, here's that trigger word to trigger, which is trendy, but it's impactful. If I can tell a scenario around me or something's about to send me down that path, I try to remove myself from it. Yeah. And that was kind of the 5th thing in there too, is remove yourself from the situation. And that's okay. To say to those around you, like, I need to step outside for a minute, or I need to move away.
Need some air.
I need some air. Yeah.
I mean, that's a real thing. A lot of people need to do that anyway. I mean,
yeah. But finding out like what is the anxiety is also helpful, or why, and without self-judgment. Because I used to judge myself, like, what is wrong?
Absolutely.
The things I used to say to myself, like, what is wrong with you? Get over it. And it's like, no, my body is saying shit's going down. We're not feeling good. Right. And brain's like, or the brain's like, no. And then the body, and then
the body follows.
The body follows. Next thing you know, it's like a tornado. And I also turn to those I know will be supportive.
Right.
I have friends I can say, I'm not feeling so well. I need to have a minute. And then I go and I find that space. And my biggest though still for me is touch. Yeah. Like, what's your number one thing that will
I have two things,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them you kind of mentioned, but the one thing is put a peppermint in your mouth.
Ooh, yeah.
Because
like a distraction.
Yeah, you can't be anxious and have a peppermint in your mouth at the same time. Apparently, it shuts that off, because you're involved in tasting the mint.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is a breathing exercise. Like it's a with that little inhale thing, and that usually does. I've also done the like look in the corner, what's over there, what's over,
The distraction.
That's probably, but um, I worked at a place recently where we were on the 10th floor, and I have an extreme elevator phobia. And every time I went in the elevator, not when I go to Las Vegas, because they're so nice and new and well maintained. But we're talking about like old office buildings in downtown Austin, okay, like who've been there forever. And so I would have to put a peppermint in my mouth after parking, and that's the only way I could get in an elevator.
Wow, we haven't even really touched on phobias, but that's part of the anxiety.
Yeah, but the anxiety is crippling. Like I remember my first day, I tried to get in the elevator that I'd been in that office the first time, and I was crying. I called my husband, and I was like, "Why am I like this?" Sorry, that makes me. I'm the cleanse. So it's like, why am I like this? Why can't I do this? Because everybody else is getting on the elevator, But they haven't also been stuck 5 times in an elevator, and one that I thought I wasn't going to get out of, which is a whole other story for another day.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's just it. And that's why people need to know that it could be you. I mean, this could look what happened out of just a malfunction, right?
Yeah.
Is just and it was a building on UT, and that created a lifelong,
But do you still have that phobia?
Yeah, this was recently.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm not at that job anymore. But I mean, this was totally recently that. And I can't tell you, like, when I left that job, my first thing was like, I never have to get it.
But does that impact you then when you're like you're saying, like Vegas, maybe not, but if you're
Vegas, it doesn't. I just have no problem just walking my happy butt onto a elevator there.
Because you're also like in Vegas, and you're
well,
like,
there's that, right? But I mean, yeah. So I mean, but I think that also makes it more real, like. If people think, oh, it's just somebody who was abused, or it's somebody, right. No, this can happen to you at any time, any place. You can have a post-traumatic, complex post-traumatic stress disorder from a car accident. Mm-hmm. And the difference between that and a post-traumatic stress disorder is, post-traumatic stress disorder is like I like to say is more like when you go through war and you have repeated exposure. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder is like a big happening. Now, sometimes there is also repeated exposure, like in terms if you're, with a narcissist or something like that. But I mean, complex, if you go through war and you have PTSD, what's going to set it off? Probably bombs, like loud noises. With complex post-traumatic stress disorder, you never know what's going to trigger it. It can be dates, it can be time of year. It can be, it can be like if you were in a car accident, it can be when you're at like getting to that crossroads, and you can have a severe panic attack.
Oh, and that's how I mentioned in the book. I was diagnosed at that point with general anxiety disorder, but I wrote about how I was looking for the emotional landmines, or I didn't know what would be an emotional landmine. Like I didn't know what was going to trigger me.
I related to that.
It was like, I think I even said too, it's like a gun, it was like Russian roulette. I was just like, there was a gun pointed in my head and I didn't know which one was going to go off. I'm sorry you related to it, but then it shows how good and the sick that this book can impact others. And I want people to not feel alone in this journey of their life if they are dealing with mental illness, no matter where they fall in that spectrum. Because some severities of it is people don't leave their home. I mean, my mom was agoraphobic, and there's times in her life she never left our house. Yeah. And I remember thinking, how must that be to live? Coming out of the pandemic, that messed up a lot of people.
Yeah. A lot of people are more agoraphobic now, or don't want to be in huge crowds.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes I can be like that just a little bit. I mean, I'm still like, oh, I'm at a concert. Let me just. But sometimes I'm like looking at the exit.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Where's the exit? Because if you have a panic attack or an anxiety attack or something happens,
where's the exit in the room?
Where's the exit? And because in my things about touch, some of that will only work so far. Like you were saying, if you're ready, really going, sometimes touching isn't enough.
No.
You need to get out of that area and get somewhere safe.
I think that's the last thing. It's like sometimes I, have to get out.
But also just self-love and self-care is so important, and just being like, you're okay, I love you, you're going to be okay. You've done nothing wrong. You know that?
You've done nothing wrong. Yeah, that's a good thing. I think that's where we leave it. Thank you, Laurie, for being with me today. Like she said, Google her. Laurie Markvart, somewhere in the... It's so funny. I've read this so many times today, and I know the name of the book. But I think like there's this thing when you're hosting, I'll get those later, but when you're hosting that you think you're going to mess up the name. So somewhere in the music, I'll find me, a memoir, available anywhere that you can get books. It is also on Audible now, so recently. So yay, congratulations on that.
Thank you for mentioning
And thank you so much for being with me today on the podcast. And hey, if you like this podcast, like, share, comment. We would love to hear from you. Let's have a discussion below. Do you want to talk about anxiety? Let's do it. Until next time, make your life your mission. We'll see you then.